Green Bay, Wisconsin, winter 2025. On Lambeau Field, a thin layer of snow covers the ground like a funeral shroud, the golden light from thousands of lamps casting a quiet, solemn glow as if for a memorial ceremony. Tens of thousands of spectators rise to their feet as the loudspeaker announces the familiar name, Hall of Famer Chester Marcol. An elderly figure, leaning on a cane, emerges from the tunnel, his steps slow and trembling, his face wrinkled but his eyes still bright. He stops in the middle of the field, raising his hand to greet the crowd. In that moment, time seems to rewind half a century, back to the days when he was young, a 22-year-old Polish immigrant who astonished America with his extraordinary kicking leg. In 1972, Chester Marcol was selected by the Green Bay Packers in the second round of the NFL Draft, a rarity for a kicker. In his rookie season, he led the league in scoring, earned All-Pro and Pro Bowl honors, and was named NFC Rookie of the Year. In the blue-collar Midwest city, the quiet Polish kid became a source of pride, a symbol of the American dream made real. In 1980, during the season opener against the Chicago Bears, when a field goal attempt was blocked, Chester recovered the ball and ran it into the end zone for a touchdown. That run made him a legend, the Polish Prince of Green Bay. His name was etched into the Packers Hall of Fame in 1987, and that image is replayed every snowy season, a symbol of miracles. But behind the dazzling lights was a fractured soul. His career crumbled abruptly after an injury, and Chester turned to alcohol, painkillers and then cocaine, the substance that kept him alive by day and destroyed him by night. When the stands roared, he felt empty. When fans chanted his name, his mind echoed with the memory of his father's suicide by hanging years before. A sense of worthlessness and loneliness gnawed at him like an invisible disease. In 1986, in a cold Michigan room, Chester drank acid and rat poison mixed with vodka, trying to end it all. But fate wouldn't allow it. He survived with a scorched throat, a perforated stomach, and hands that trembled forever. In that pain, he saw something he'd never seen in his life, a second chance. He walked through hell, became a counselor for other addicts, and shared his own story to save them. On Lambeau Field today, he is no longer the hero of victories, but a symbol of survival. Amid the cheers, he offers a faint smile, his eyes glimmering with profound sadness. The narrator's voice softens. In 1980, he was America's hero. In 1986, he tried to kill himself, and now he's just a shadow that survived. Then silence. A cold wind sweeps through his silver hair. In that moment, people understand, this is not just a story about a football player, but a requiem for a soul that once burned too brightly amid America's icy chill. He stands in the glowing light of Lambeau Field, and in the moment the stadium lights reflect in his clouded eyes, one can glimpse a boy from over 60 years ago, a child born in Opole, Poland, amid the rubble of the post-war era. In 1949, the city still smelled of bomb smoke, broken bricks and cheap liquor. In a small house by the Oder River, a poor, unemployed Polish man drank every night to forget the war and hunger. Young Chester, barely a teenager, learned to read his mother's eyes instead of books, because she spoke little and was always busy finding ways to survive. One winter morning, he found his father hanging in the shed, a scene that would scar his memory forever, like a wound that never heals. From that day, the boy's world shattered, and the fear of loneliness became the only language he understood. In 1965, his mother scraped together what little money they had and took Chester across the ocean to America, a land of promises they couldn't fully comprehend. Michigan greeted them with snow, wind, and silence. In Imlay City, winter didn't carry the scent of baked bread like back home, only the smell of bus exhaust and unfamiliar words. Chester didn't know a word of English. Every day at school was a silent battle. American kids laughed at his accent, threw paper at his back, called him the foreign kid, the weird one. As a teenager, he learned to shrink, stay quiet, and hide at the back of the class. Every afternoon, he sat in the bleachers of the football field, watching his peers toss a football to each other, then leave it on the wet grass. One day, when everyone had gone, Chester stepped down and picked up the ball. He didn't know the rules, only how to kick, as he had once kicked tattered cloth balls in Poland. The ball sailed, spinning, whistling through the evening mist, and crashed hard into the iron fence at the end of the field. The clang echoed like an explosion, breaking the silence in his heart. For the first time since his father's death, Chester felt alive. The next day, he returned to the field and kicked again. Each kick was a word for the things he couldn't express. Each whistle of the ball a melody that transcended language barriers. The immigrant boy began to be noticed. A gym teacher, Mr. McDonald, stopped after class, watched him, and said, "Kid, you've got a leg." Chester didn't fully understand, only catching the word leg, and the first smile someone offered him. From then on, the field became his classroom, and the football his only companion. When kids mocked his accent, he smiled. When they pushed him down, he stood up. When they isolated him, he kicked harder. Michigan's cold was no longer an enemy, it became a companion, as if America only understood him through the sound of a ball cutting through the wind. He learned to love America, not with words, but with sweat, blood, and grass stains. On winter evenings, while his mother sewed clothes in their cramped apartment, Chester went to the field, barefoot in the snow, kicking hundreds of times, each kick a prayer for his father, his mother, and himself. Slowly, the small school began to see him differently. Coaches sought him out, gave him new shoes, and for the first time he heard the word team. He was no longer the foreign kid, he was a kicker. The one thing he never lost was his silence. Years later, in the lights of Lambeau Field, you could still hear in every kick of Chester's the echo of that boy, the child from Opole, carrying the memory of his father's hanging, the freezing Michigan nights, kicking the ball as if defying fate itself. The immigrant boy didn't know how to say "I belong," but the football spoke for him. No one taught Chester to love America, no flag in his hand, no promises on his lips. He learned it in his own way, by bleeding on the grass. The years in Michigan passed like a cold wind, and then one day, the feet that once kicked a ball in the snow carried Chester to his destiny. Hillsdale College, a small school in central Michigan, where no one expected miracles, but it was here, one afternoon in 1969, that the Polish immigrant student made a kick that football history could not forget. The ball was placed at the 50-yard line, wind blowing against him, the stands holding just a few hundred people. Chester stepped back 3 paces, eyes fixed forward, and kicked. The ball shot like a bullet, slicing through the air, clearing the uprights. 62 yards, a league record. The small stadium erupted. Teammates hoisted him onto their shoulders, shouting his name in the falling snow. Chester didn't understand all their words, but for the first time in his life, he felt he belonged. No longer the immigrant, no longer the foreign kid, he was American, in his own way. That kick changed everything. NFL scouts took notice. Newspapers called him Polish Cannon, the European leg. But Chester, the student still living in a small dorm, still writing letters to his mother, only knew that one day, the ball would take him farther than his dreams. In 1972, the Green Bay Packers called his name in the NFL draft, 2nd round, a rarity for a kicker. When he heard the news, Chester wept. He couldn't believe that someone once mocked for his accent could step into America's most sacred team, where Vince Lombardi once stood, where the heroes of the Midwest were born. He arrived in Green Bay in an old jacket, walked through the gates of Lambeau Field, breathed in the cold air, and whispered, "This is my home." His first season, a legend. Chester led the entire NFL in scoring with 128 points, made 33 field goals, earned All-Pro, Pro Bowl, and was named NFC Rookie of the Year. From an immigrant kid who couldn't speak English, he became a symbol of working-class America, the kind of dream only America could create. The press wrote, "Chester Marcol, the foreign boy who kicks like thunder." In Wisconsin, factory workers, farmers and mill hands raised their beers and shouted his name at the TV. They saw themselves in him, rough, resilient, unflashy. Chester was one of them. That winter, Lambeau Field was a place of miracles. The wind cut like knives, snow fell sideways, but every time Chester stepped onto the field, the crowd held its breath. He set the ball down, took 3 steps back, wind whipping his face, the roar of fans blending with the whistle. The ball left his foot, flying straight, piercing the snow like light through a storm. The stands exploded. Chants of Chester, Chester, echoed through Green Bay, a winter hymn. Each kick proved that someone once abandoned could make America bow in awe. After games, teammates slapped his shoulder, reporters swarmed, flashes blazed. Chester smiled, a shy smile from someone still unaccustomed to the spotlight. But when night fell, and the locker room emptied, Chester sat alone on a bench, opening a beer, his hands trembling. Outside, snow fell on the small city. The wind howled through the window, mingling with the pounding of his heart. He stared into the beer can, seeing his father's face, empty eyes, a swinging rope. Chester took another swig, trying to chase the image away, but the more he drank, the clearer it became. All his life, he had kicked to escape the darkness, but the darkness chased him, as fast as his own kicks. The narrator's voice drops, mournful like a distant drum. From a mocked immigrant, Chester became a symbol of working-class America, but even as they cheered him, the emptiness inside him began to open its mouth. The more famous he became, the lonelier Chester grew. He lived in a small Green Bay apartment. No close friends, just practice schedules, game schedules, and a fridge full of beer. Teammates said he rarely smiled, rarely spoke, only practiced and kicked, as if each kick was a way to punish himself. Every night, he wrote letters to his mother, ending with "Mom, I'm okay." But he was never okay. After each game, he sat in the dark, listening to the silenced stands, wondering, if I can't kick anymore, who will remember me? Glory came too fast, and planted the seeds of loneliness too soon. People saw Chester Marcol, the hero, the record setter, the future Hall of Famer. No one saw Chester, the Opole boy still trembling in the night, afraid he'd vanish if he stopped winning. And then, like a small crack in the ice, the darkness began to seep in. At victory parties, he drank more. On team flights, he stared silently out the window, hearing his heart race in solitude. No one noticed. Everyone thought he was strong, because only the strong could kick through snow and wind. But inside, he was weaker than ever. In the light of Lambeau, Chester Marcol became a legend. In the darkness after the lights, he returned to being the homeless boy of years past, sitting alone with his shadow. No one knew that inside him, the emptiness was beginning to open its mouth. September 7, 1980, Lambeau Field. The wind from the Fox River blows against, cold and damp, as if winter arrived earlier than usual. The Packers face the Chicago Bears, one of the fiercest season openers in history. The score is tied, 6-6, overtime. The entire stadium holds its breath. On the giant screen, 0 o'clock flashes. One chance remains, a field goal to end it. Chester Marcol, 31 years old, steps onto the field. The wind whistles past his ears. Light snow begins to fall, the grass frozen like metal. He steps back 3 paces, hands on his knees, heart pounding so hard he hears it in his chest. The toe of his cleat touches the ground. The snap is perfect. The ball set up. Chester kicks a strike like thunder, but a millisecond later, a Bears defender's arm grazes the ball, blocked. The ball bounces back, landing in Chester's hands. In that instant, the world freezes. The wind, the crowd, the blood rushing in his ears all merge into chaos. Without thinking, without hesitation, Chester tucks the ball and runs. 25 yards, 20 yards, 10 yards. Massive bodies charge at him. A tackle grazes by, a slip on the ice, then he leaps over the end zone line. Touchdown. Lambeau Field erupts. 60,000 people scream. Every newspaper the next morning will write, "The miracle kicker scores the winning touchdown with his own hands." Yellow towels fly into the air like snow. Tears stream down fans' faces. For a moment, America kneels before a kicker. Chester is hoisted onto his teammates' shoulders, waving, smiling brightly. That image is replayed for a decade, a symbol of the Packers' spirit, of never giving up. But few know that in the moment that hero crossed the goal line, a white current ran through his blood, cocaine. After the game, as reporters leave and teammates shower, Chester sits alone in the locker room. The cheers still echo from afar, but in his head, Only the violent thump of his heart and heavy breathing remain, like stones. He opens his locker, pulls out a small bag hidden in his jacket, hands trembling. A line of white powder falls onto the table, cold and glinting under the fluorescent light. He snorts deeply. The sensation hits like a wave, head light, heart racing, chest ablaze. He leans back against the wall, tears spilling, not from joy, but from fear. He just performed a miracle, but feels nothing but emptiness. In the shower, water pours down. Chester bends over, vomiting blood mixed with powder, nose bleeding, hands gripping the sink. The mirror reflects a distorted, sweat-soaked face, the American hero turning into a decaying addict. He hears teammates laughing in the hallway, the pop of beer cans, whistling. He wants to join them, to blend into their laughter, but his legs won't move. His body shakes, ice cold, hands trembling uncontrollably. On the radio outside, the announcer shouts, "Chester Marcol, the miracle man of Lambeau." He lets out a dry laugh. It chokes, turning into a sob. The narrator's voice drops, heavy like smoke. It was his most divine moment, and also the moment he lost his soul. For while America believed Chester Marcol was proof of will and faith, he knew the truth. The miracle was born from sin. Every kick, every breath, every touch of the ball was driven by an invisible demon, the sweet white powder eating away at his body by the hour. That night, he leaves the stadium as snow falls heavily. Reporters chase him for quotes. He only smiles. "I just did what I had to do." No one sees his hands shake as he opens the car door. No one knows he snorted another hit before leaving the parking lot. The headlights cut through the snow, illuminating a pale face, the lonely hero of America. As the car moves through empty streets, Chester sees his father's face reflected in the windshield, and hears the voice in his head, "You'll end up like me." That touchdown made him a legend, but it also marked the beginning of his downfall. The media called him the chosen one. Chester laughed, but inside, he knew if anyone had chosen him, it wasn't God. From that night, cocaine was no longer a game. It became his breath, his private religion. The mornings after games, he woke in hotel rooms, cold sweat, head pounding like a hammer, eyes red from sleeplessness. But outside, America still celebrated, replaying the video of him running into the end zone. And every time he saw it, he felt like someone was strangling his heart. Winter 1980, Chester Marcol was no longer just a player. He was two people, a hero on TV and an addict outside the light. In every kick, he hid a plea for freedom. But no one heard. No one wanted to hear. The Packers kept winning, Chester kept scoring, and the hole in his heart grew deeper. The story closes with a curse-like line. The hero of working-class America had, in truth, been signed by the devil on his heel. After the Lambeau miracle, Chester's career walked on thin ice. In the seasons that followed, the leg that once shook stadiums began to betray him. A thigh injury during practice weakened his kicks, each one painful like a knife. Doctors told him to rest for weeks, but for Chester, rest meant disappearing. He taped his leg, gritted his teeth, and kept kicking, treating himself at night with alcohol, painkillers, and then cocaine. His body grew numb, his mind sliding deeper into the abyss. By 1975, the Packers grew suspicious. They saw their star kicker arrive at the field with bloodshot eyes, cold sweat, and breath heavy with liquor. The 1980 season, his peak, and the start of his end, he still played, still smiled, but his kicks lost their precision. On the 8th of October 1980, Green Bay cut his contract. No farewell party, no applause, just a brief note, "Thank you, and good luck." A week later, he signed briefly with the Houston Oilers, played one game, then vanished from the NFL. When the season ended, Chester Marcol, once called the Packers icon, had no team, no salary, and, most crucially, no purpose to live. He returned to Michigan, living in a cheap, moldy apartment with dim yellow lights. The fridge held only beer and a few bottles of painkillers. Each morning, He woke with trembling hands and a heart racing like an alarm. He drank beer like water, snorted cocaine like air. No contract, no friends, no phone calls. Every time the TV replayed the 1,980 Bears win, he shut it off, as if the cheers could crush his heart. Some nights, he called old teammates, but hearing them talk about family and new lives, he fell silent. He realized that after the bright lights, no one stayed for the darkness. Then, one night in 1981, tragedy knocked. Chester came home drunk, reeking of liquor, drugs, and sweat. He argued with his wife. Words turned to shouts. "You're just like your father, a drunk, a coward," she screamed. The words pierced like a knife. He snapped, ran to the bedroom, grabbed a hunting rifle. His 5-year-old daughter, Julie, playing in the living room, froze in terror, seeing her father with a gun, eyes red, face wet with tears. Neighbors heard the screams, called the police. When the patrol arrived, they found Chester slumped, head down, the rifle slipping from his hands, his little girl sobbing in the corner. The police cuffed him in front of his daughter. He never forgot her eyes, fearful, shattered, as if seeing a stranger. After that, his marriage collapsed. His wife took their daughter and left, leaving him alone in an empty house, with photos of his playing days on the walls like reminders of his sins. The years passed, and things only worsened. Chester stopped working. He lived off welfare, spending it all on alcohol and drugs. Sometimes he spoke to kids about sports, but after each session, he returned to his addiction. He later wrote in his autobiography, "I didn't want to be a hero anymore. I just wanted to disappear." On a winter night in 1986, Chester decided to end it all. The small room in Dollar Bay was eerily quiet. He lit a candle, placed it on the table next to old photos, one of his father, one of his mother, and one of himself in a Packers uniform. The smell of metal and alcohol filled the air. On the table was a mix of acid, rat poison, and vodka. He mixed them silently, like preparing the last drink of his life. Outside, the wind howled through steel frames, ice falling from the eaves. He looked at the candle, gave a faint smile. "It's time," then drank. The pain hit instantly. His throat burned, his stomach felt torn apart, blood gushed out. Chester collapsed, clawing at the walls, gasping, eyes wide. In his delirium, he heard the wind turn into the cheers of Lambeau Field. "Chester! Chester!" mixing with his father's laughter. He crawled toward the candle, but it flickered out. The room plunged into darkness. The next morning, a neighbor found him unconscious, lips purple, blood seeping from his mouth. The hospital declared he survived after stomach pumping, but his throat and esophagus were severely burned, his stomach perforated, requiring multiple surgeries. The doctor said, "You're lucky to be breathing." But Chester didn't believe it was luck. When he opened his eyes, he stared at the white hospital ceiling, hearing the steady beep of the heart monitor, thinking he was in hell. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse rasp came out, like a man who'd lost his voice. He lay there for months, fed through tubes, body wasted, skin wrinkled, hair graying early. They said his body lived, but his soul had died. When discharged, Chester walked slowly, hunched, each breath heavy like carrying stones. No one waited outside. No fans, no teammates. Just an old jacket and a hospital bill. He told himself, "I'm already dead. This is just a body walking." He returned to the cold apartment, turned on the TV, saw new, young, smiling kickers. He switched it off, sat in the dark, hearing only his faint heartbeat. That year, he was 36. Chester Marcol, the Packers' hero, the man who made America roar with the Lambeau miracle, was declared a survivor. But inside, he had vanished. The years after that near-death experience passed slowly for Chester, like the ticking of a clock in a rehab room. He entered a recovery center in Michigan not out of faith, but because he had nowhere else to go. His body was gaunt, hands trembling, voice raspy, each breath like a knife's cut. He sat in therapy rooms, watching people younger than him, faces weary, eyes hopeless, and realized they were all like him at some point, convinced they were unworthy of forgiveness. In the early days, Chester said nothing. He sat silently, listening to counselors talk about hope, about forgiveness, words he didn't believe in. But one evening, a 19-year-old stood up and shared that his father had killed himself with poison, and he feared following the same path. Chester bowed his head, tears falling. That boy had just retold his own life story. From that moment, Chester began to learn to believe he could be forgiven not by others, but by himself. He stayed at the center longer than planned. Gradually, he helped others, listening, comforting, sharing stories he'd once kept hidden. When a young man asked, "Who were you before you came here?" Chester gave a faint smile. "A guy who had everything and lost everything. But God didn't give up on me." From then on, he became part of the recovery program. People no longer called him the legendary kicker, but Counselor Chester. He began speaking at churches, schools, community centers, not for money, but to warn. Glory can't cover the abyss in your soul, and drugs don't care if you're a nobody or a Packers hero. Each time he stood before a microphone, his hands still shook, his voice hoarse and halting, but in his aging, clouded eyes, a light shone, the one he'd spent his life searching for. In 2011, Chester released his memoir, *Alive and Kicking Times, a book detailing his journey from NFL heights to hell and back. At the first book signing, in a small Wisconsin library, he sat behind an old wooden table, pen trembling in hand. A long line formed, mostly former addicts who'd read his story and saw themselves in it. As he signed the first book, his hand shook so much the ink smudged, and a tear fell onto the word kicking. He looked at the blurred ink, whispering to himself, "I'm still alive, God." Alongside newfound faith, his body bore the scars of the past. A damaged stomach and scorched throat made every meal agony. His hands twitched. His voice sometimes choked mid-sentence. But Chester no longer ran. Each morning, he woke early, brewed coffee, wrote a few lines in his journal, and went for a walk. He often told young patients, "Don't fear pain. It reminds you you're still alive." Standing among recovery groups, he spoke not as a victor, but as someone still fighting daily. He shared about the NFL, the legendary night at Lambeau, not with pride but with remorse. "I was there, amid the cheers, and felt lonelier than ever." Over the years, Chester became a familiar face at recovery events in Michigan and Wisconsin. He took the stage slowly, holding the microphone like a cane. Audiences fell silent as he spoke of that fateful moment in 1986 when he drank acid and rat poison, then woke in a hospital bed. "I thought God had forgotten me," he said. "But when I opened my eyes, I realized only when you hit rock bottom do you understand salvation." Those words hushed the room. No one clapped. Only soft sobs broke the silence. Chester often said that if there was any miracle in his life, it wasn't the 1,980 touchdown, but surviving to tell this story. "Back then, I kicked footballs. Today, I kick myself one step at a time, out of the abyss." At the end of each talk, he bowed his head, clasped his hands, and said one line, "If I can live again, so can you." Despite frail health, Chester traveled, from high schools to church halls. He no longer shied from pain. He carried old photos, a young man in a Packers uniform, beaming, and an old gaunt man beside a "Recovery Meeting Tonight" sign. He showed both to audiences, saying, "This is the same person. One who learned the spotlight's glow is never as warm as the light in your heart." In his later years, Chester Marcol had little wealth, no fame, but something he lacked at his peak: peace. Each night before bed, he prayed for those still battling addiction, for those not yet saved. Once, a reporter asked, "Do you remember scoring at Lambeau?" Chester smiled, eyes kind. "I do. But now I know the most important kick of my life wasn't at a goalpost. It was toward the sky. He no longer kicks for the Packers. He kicks for those lying in the depths. In 2025, winter blankets northern Michigan in white. In a small house in Dollar Bay, Chester Marcol, now 76, wakes to a misty morning. Pale gray light filters through thin curtains, illuminating a framed Packers photo on the wall. On the table sit painkillers, a glass of warm water, and a calendar marked with physical therapy appointments. His days unfold slowly, quietly, as if time treads lightly out of pity for his broken bones and cracked heart. He rubs his back, practices breathing, and tries lifting his left leg, the one that once sent a ball soaring over 50 yards. Now, each movement reminds him that life took his strength but gave him peace in return. In the afternoon, Chester sits by the window, shakily signing Packers posters sent by fans. His signature trembles, ink smudging, but recipients treasure them like relics. He smiles gently at handwritten notes from kids. "You're my dad's hero." His eyes, dim with age, need a magnifying glass to read, but each letter is a small flame warming the room. At night, as snow falls, he lights the fireplace, the crackling wood mingling with stories he tells his young grandchild, wrapped in a blanket, about snowy days at Lambeau. His voice, hoarse but warm, says, "The best kick isn't the one that scores. It's the kick of kindness. Live kindly, kid, that's the real touchdown." The child giggles, not fully understanding, but Chester's eyes soften with a light only those who've survived hell can carry. On clear days, Chester drives his old pickup to the recovery center in Houghton, where he still speaks to those in rehab. He moves slowly but steadily, gripping the microphone with trembling hands, starting as always, "I'm living proof that hell has a way back." Each time he says it, the room falls silent. They believe him, his raspy voice carries undeniable truth. He speaks of drunken nights, the acid-filled room of 1986, and waking in the hospital, still alive. "If I made it," he says, "you can too." Those simple words, spoken without melodrama, hold more power than any sermon. People hug him after talks, many crying, and Chester just smiles, pats their shoulders, and says, "The first kick back to life is forgiving yourself." Though frail, he keeps his afternoon walks along the snowy path to Lake Superior. His steps are deep, slow, steady, like the beat of a heart that's learned calm. He tells his old neighbor, "Every day I wake up, breathe, I've won another game." That line spreads through the small community, inspiring even those who don't know who he was. In the Packers Hall of Fame in Green Bay, where the team's legacy is preserved, Chester's photo hangs in the middle row. The image of him raising his hand, running into the end zone in 1980, glows under the lights. But a new inscription is carved beneath the wooden frame. Asterisk, asterisk, he fell, he rose, he saved. Asterisk, asterisk. The brief words tell a lifetime of a man who fell to the depths, rose, and saved more souls than he ever did as a hero on the field. At night, Chester sits quietly, watching snow fall outside the window. Firelight flickers on his aged face, deep eyes, and white hair, but his gaze holds rare serenity. Sometimes he turns on the TV, sees the Packers play, watches young, strong kickers take the field, and nods slightly. He feels no regret. He knows each generation has its own miracles. His miracle was completed long ago, not on a scoreboard, but in the lives of those who nearly lost themselves. As night falls, he writes a few lines in a notebook on the table. "Every kick is a chance for redemption. I've kicked thousands, but the final kick was choosing to live." He closes the book, turns off the light, and the small house falls silent, save for the wind outside. And when winter sweeps in, blanketing Lambeau Field in snow, people still tell the story of the 1,980 kick, the miracle that made America hold its breath. But now, they tell another story, of a man who survived the darkness and found light within himself again. From the window of the small house in Dollar Bay, the last light of the afternoon fades over Lake Superior. Chester Marcol sits quietly, watching the ice melt, his trembling hands resting on his knees, and in that moment, an entire life flickers like an old film. From an orphaned Polish boy raised in poverty and fear, to an NFL hero who set America ablaze with the legendary moment of 1980. Then, from that peak, he plummeted into the abyss, becoming an addict who nearly died, only to rise from his own ashes to save others. A strange life cycle full of tears, blood, and miracles. The narrator's voice rises slowly, low, and true. From an orphaned Polish boy, to an NFL hero, to an addict who nearly died, to a savior of others. That's the 4 chapters in the Bible of one man's life. Chester's story is not just a personal tragedy. It's a mirror reflecting America, a nation that worships victory, glory, and strength, but often forgets that behind the helmet, behind the cleats and the cheers, is a fragile heart trying not to break. We celebrate winners, but rarely ask who will hold their hand when the lights go out, when the stands fall silent. Chester Marcol once had it all: fame, money, admiration, but what saved him wasn't the crowd, wasn't the spotlight, but the kindness of ordinary people. A counselor's smile, a boy calling him by name, a hand on his shoulder saying, "You can still live." Those small acts saved him, like a faint light rescuing someone lost in the snow. If you know someone sinking in addiction, despair, or their own darkness, don't turn away. Look at them, call them by name. Tell them they still have worth, still have a chance. Because sometimes, a gentle word can save a lost soul. Chester once said, "I don't want people to remember me for the kick. I want them to remember I didn't give up." That's his true legacy, not in the Hall of Fame, but in the hearts of those he touched. Now, as snow falls again on Lambeau Field, fans still talk about the legendary 1980 touchdown, but they also tell the story of a man who stood up after life crushed him. A man who can no longer run, but still walks each day with gratitude. Chester Marcol's life teaches us that the greatest feat isn't kicking through the goalposts, but standing up after life has run you through. If Chester's story touched you, leave a like not for the NFL legend, but for the man who found himself again amid the ice. And remember, in a noisy world, sometimes the real hero isn't the one being cheered, but the one still trying to live another day. In Chester Marcol's story, what pains us most isn't just what he endured, but how America saw him, then forgot him, then needed him in a different way. We cheered for him on the 7th of September, 1980, when he scooped up a blocked ball and ran into the end zone for a touchdown in overtime against the Chicago Bears, turning Lambeau Field into a storm of joy. We called him a hero. We hung his photo in the Packers Hall of Fame with the inscription, "He fell, he rose, he saved." But when the lights dimmed, when a thigh injury stole his kicking strength, when the Packers cut his contract and his NFL career ended after a single game with the Houston Oilers, Chester entered a battle with no stands rising for him anymore. He drank liquor like water, lived on cocaine, was handcuffed in front of his 5-year-old daughter, and in 1986 tried to end his life with a mix of acid, rat poison, and vodka. He hit the lowest point a human can reach. And that's the part we often don't want to see. That's what hurts most. Because Chester wasn't evil. He was an ordinary American crushed by the pressure to be strong, to be a pillar, to be an icon, even when he was just a Polish immigrant boy who'd watched his father hang himself. But what makes his story sacred is this: he didn't stop there. After surviving his suicide attempt, throat burned, stomach perforated, he didn't choose to vanish. He entered rehab, heard a young man say his father died the same way Chester's did, and instead of hiding in shame, Chester stood and told the room, "I'm the guy who had it all and lost it all, but God didn't give up on me." From being saved, he became a savior. At 76, hands trembling, eyes dim, he still tells young addicts, "I'm living proof that hell has a way back." That's not a slogan, that's hard-earned truth. The lesson for us, for the people of the United States, isn't "try hard and you'll succeed." That's a pretty but empty phrase. The real lesson is, don't abandon each other. Don't walk away from someone at their lowest. Don't call anyone hopeless when you haven't held their hand and said their name. Because Chester's resurrection didn't come from money, fame, or the NFL. It came from something deeply American, deeply human. Someone looked at him unafraid and said, "You're still worth something." We live in a country that glorifies victory on the field, but if we don't learn to honor those fighting to live another day off the field, we haven't truly grasped the meaning of community. Chester Marcol reminds us that human dignity isn't in the moment Lambeau Field erupted. Human dignity is in standing up after life has run you through and using your remaining breath to lift others with you. If Chester Marcol's story makes you believe that every person deserves a second chance, hit subscribe to join us in spreading these stories of resilient rebirth. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next video where we celebrate those who fall but never stop rising.